On August 23rd, 2010, the British were shocked when news broke that a young MI6 agent had been found dead inside a North London flat. His body was discovered by a colleague who had come over to pick him up for work, only to find him lifeless inside a zipped-up holdall. But there was one horrifying twist to this already grisly tale. The 23-year-old agent was discovered inside his own bathtub. So what exactly happened to him? Did he accidentally fall asleep inside his bag and then drown? Or was this an elaborate assassination carried out by a foreign intelligence agency? Now, before we begin, like and smash that subscribe button for future videos. Now, back to the video. When Gareth Williams' colleagues arrived at his home to pick him up for a shift at work, they knew something was wrong. He hadn't answered his phone for several hours, and they were beginning to get worried. When they eventually got inside, they made a gruesome discovery. They found Gareth's lifeless body inside a holdall in his bathroom. At first, they thought that he must have left the bag there by mistake and then gone for a shower, only to accidentally pass out and drown. But as they looked closer, they realized that the bag had been zipped up from the outside. As they struggled to open it, the full horror of the situation slowly dawned on them. It wasn't just a bag, it was a sports bag, specifically a holdall belonging to Gareth's old school. They eventually managed to unzip it and pull out Gareth's body. He was cold to the touch and clearly had been dead for some time. The police were called, and the entire neighborhood was cordoned off. It quickly became clear that Gareth's death was a complete mystery. There were no signs of a struggle. Nothing appeared to be stolen, and there was no obvious cause of death. How had he ended up trapped in his own bathroom, and what had killed him? As the police began their investigation, they spoke to Gareth's friends and family to try and piece together a timeline of the day leading up to his death. This was important because although Gareth's exact cause of death remained unknown, the hope was that it would provide a clue as to what had happened. But what they found was a man who seemingly led a very ordinary life. Gareth had moved into the flat above a shop with his girlfriend, Emily. He had been working for MI6 for almost 2 years, and while naturally secretive, nothing about his job was particularly unusual. On the day of his death, he had met up with his father in central London. The pair had lunch and then caught a train back north, where they visited a local pub for a couple of drinks. After parting ways with his dad at around 4 p.m., Gareth returned home and told his girlfriend that he was going to take a bath. Emily later told the police that this was very normal behavior and that Gareth loved taking long baths. It seems safe to assume that he did this to unwind after a hard day's work. According to the post-mortem examination, Gareth likely died between 7:30 p.m. and midnight. But there was still absolutely no indication as to how or why. The police scoured his apartment, but found nothing suspicious except for traces of an unknown white powder on his bathroom sink. They sent this off for testing, but it was never identified, and the results were inconclusive. Was it simply soap? We may never know. One of the most perplexing aspects of this case is that every door and window in the property was locked from the inside. This strongly suggested that Gareth hadn't been kidnapped, and that he himself had locked the doors. But if this was the case, how could he have been trapped inside the holdall when his body was discovered? The only possible explanation seemed to be that he had somehow fallen asleep while inside the bag and then suffocated. But there were several problems with this theory. First of all, the amount of carbon dioxide that would have built up inside the bag to kill Gareth would have also killed someone of larger stature, but Gareth was skinny, standing just 5 feet, 6 inches tall. Secondly, while it is theoretically possible to fall asleep in such a small space, it would have been incredibly uncomfortable and difficult to breathe. It seems unlikely that Gareth would have been able to drift off. Furthermore, when his colleagues arrived at the flat, they noticed that the bathroom window was slightly open. If Gareth had been in the bath when they arrived, the rising water temperature would have heated the air inside the room, causing the window to open further. But this hadn't happened. There was no sign that the window had been forced open. Something else that doesn't quite add up is that according to the post-mortem, Gareth had drowned. But how could this have happened when he was breathing just moments before his death? You can't drown unless you're underwater. And while it's impossible to say for sure without more evidence, it seems very likely that Gareth was killed elsewhere and that his body was then placed in the bag and put in the bathtub. But if this was the case, why go through all that effort? And if it was an assassination, who was responsible? Gareth Williams's work at MI6 was shrouded in secrecy, and it wasn't until well after his death that his true role was revealed. Before joining the service, he studied at Cambridge University, graduating with a degree in computer technology. He had always been interested in languages and spent a year teaching English in Tanzania before returning to the UK. At MI6, he specialized in cyberarms control and worked on cases related to Iran, North Korea, and Syria. However, due to the sensitive nature of his work, his colleagues knew very little about him personally. In the months before his death, Gareth had mentioned that he was dealing with a personal matter, possibly related to his mother, who had recently passed away. But other than that, there was no indication that he was having any problems or that he had made any enemies at work. Despite his colleagues' best efforts, they couldn't think of anyone who might want Gareth dead. So let's explore the three remaining theories. First, was this a tragic accident? Perhaps Gareth slipped in the bath and knocked himself unconscious. Then, in a panic, he tried to get himself upright and ended up trapping himself inside the holdall. Unfortunately, he couldn't get it open from the inside and ultimately suffocated. It's also possible that he fell asleep in the bath and accidentally drowned. While the carbon dioxide theory doesn't add up, it's possible that Gareth simply inhaled some of the water vapor and then aspirated, meaning that liquid went down his windpipe and blocked his airway. But if this was the case, surely there would have been signs of a struggle. There was no way that Gareth could have zipped up the holdall with his hands unless he had somehow lost consciousness. And even then, it would have been extremely difficult. And don't forget that he would have needed to lock the bathroom door from the inside before slipping into the bath. This alone makes accidental death highly unlikely. That leaves us with two possibilities. Was this an inside job, perhaps something to do with one of Gareth's assignments or a personal grudge? Or was it a foreign power seeking revenge for their country being spied on? Well, given that no secrets were leaked during Gareth's tenure at MI6, and that his work primarily involved gathering intelligence rather than direct operations, it's unlikely that he made many enemies in the line of duty. This leaves us with the far more intriguing possibility that he was the victim of a foreign intelligence agency. But which one, and why? Well, before his death, Gareth had been working on a number of high-profile cases involving Iran, North Korea, and Syria, all countries known for their hostile stances towards the West. But he had also worked on cases involving Russia and China, two other countries with whom the UK has increasingly strained relations. In fact, the timing of Gareth's death was impeccable. Just 4 days earlier, Britain had expelled 4 Russian diplomats in connection with the poisoning of former Russian spy Sergei Skripal. Could this have been retaliation? But if so, why kill just one low-level MI6 agent? It wouldn't exactly send a strong message to the British government. In the end, we may never know who was behind Gareth's death. But what we do know is that it was a cowardly way to go. Gareth's body was discovered zipped up in a holdall in his own bathroom. He was trapped, helpless and alone. Whoever was responsible for his death wanted to make sure that he didn't make it out alive, and they succeeded. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he was killed elsewhere and then brought back to his flat. For all we know, he could have been killed inside the holdall. Someone could have pushed him inside and then zipped it up from the outside, trapping him inside. Of course, this raises more questions than it answers, such as how on earth would whoever was responsible fit his body inside the bag without being seen? Well, maybe they had drugged him, rendering him unconscious and making it easier to bundle him into the bag. But then why put him in the bath afterwards? And what was the purpose of locking the doors from the inside? While the police were never able to determine what had happened to Gareth, they did uncover some interesting details about his death. For example, they discovered that the last entry into his bank account had been a withdrawal for £80 made at 9 p.m. on the day he died. But it's unlikely that this was the motive. Instead, it may have been part of a larger effort to cover his tracks. Whoever was responsible for Gareth's death knew that he would be missed, so they needed to make it look like he had disappeared voluntarily. Perhaps he had been given the choice of being killed or watching his girlfriend die. Maybe they had threatened her, knowing that it would hurt him more if she was killed. All of these are dark possibilities, but without any concrete evidence, we'll never know for sure. No fingerprints, no signs of a struggle, and no clear cause of death. Was it a tragic accident? Or was it a secret spy assassination? What do you think happened? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.